this larger society would tell you that Sylvia and I want two different things because she's a doctor and I'm not. But she has as great of an impact in terms of our community as I do. It's just different. But this society will want to qualify to say which one is better or the best. We as Black women have to decide this for ourselves. We are brilliant as Black women, and that we know what our community needs, that we are the ones that are experts on ourselves. No one else can be experts on us but us.
My name is Nekima Armstrong. I'm a civil rights attorney and activist, as well as executive director of the Wayfinder Foundation. The Wayfinder Foundation supports Black and Brown women on the front lines fighting for social change in various cities around the country. Today, we're going to explore the topic of Black women's leadership, and I have a number of esteemed guests who will join me today and share their insights. So, without further ado, we're going to bring on our panelists. They're going to introduce themselves as well as share one word about Black women's leadership as we dive into today's conversation. Hello, ladies. Thank you so much for joining me this afternoon.
Hello, Nakima.
Hi, Nekima. Thanks for having us.
Yes, thank you.
So, as you all know, our topic for today is focused on Black women's leadership. And a part of the reason why we're focusing on this issue is because we feel that Black women do not receive the credit that is due for the heavy lifting that we do day in and day out. Somehow we're able to be the backbones of our families, of our communities, and of society. But often our contributions get ignored or downplayed, and we're pushed to the back burner, even though our leadership dictates that we are supposed to be front and center. Because again, when Black women are on the scene, we don't just focus on ourselves, we focus on everyone around us, across generations, across genders, across backgrounds, and we deserve significantly more support as well as opportunities to show our leadership and to help bring about change than we currently receive. So we want to dive into this topic today. We're going to have folks tuning in from across a variety of sectors, including philanthropy. And it's my goal and the goal of Wayfinder Foundation to ensure that these individuals who are in positions of power and authority understand who we are as Black women, the role that we play in our communities and in society, and the support that we firmly deserve. Before we begin, I want to give a shout out to all the Black women out there who are listening, who know exactly what we're talking about in terms of all this heavy lifting that we do. And the fact that, again, we're under supported, undervalued, and underappreciated, and it's unacceptable. So, with that being said, I would love to invite our three panelists to each introduce yourself. So, tell us your name, tell us what you do, whether it's, for an organization or something that you just love doing, with your time on a day-to-day basis, where you're from, and then also one word that describes the current state of Black women's leadership. Why don't we start with you, Dr. Sylvia Bartley?
Okay, well, thank you again, Nekima, for this opportunity and for creating a platform to have this really important discussion. Because as you said, we are here, but our voices are not heard too often. And if they are heard, they are silent. So my name is Sylvia Bartley. I am going to break my introduction down into three categories. I work for a large global public health organization called JSI. I'm their chief of staff. It's a relatively new role. I've been there for 8 months, and John Snow Incorporation is a phenomenal organization that essentially does lots of public health work around the world at a very impactful level. So we're one of the largest implementers for USAID, and we do significant work in areas that primarily address health equity. Prior to working for JSI, I worked for a medical device industry in corporate America for over 20 years. And in that role, it spanned sales, marketing, technical expertise, philanthropy, and health equity. So really had a good experience in this field, working cross-functionally across different organizations and in a multitude of countries to advance access to care for patients with particular chronic illnesses. So that was a nice experience. And then prior to that, I'm dating myself with all of this experience. I worked 13 years in an academic institution in London, the Royal London School of Medicine and Dentistry. And that's where I did scientific research and got my doctorate in neurophysiology. In addition to that, the second part, what I love to do in my time is work with community. I am so committed and dedicated to working primarily in underserved and minoritized communities, particularly communities that look like us. Why do I do that? Because that's where we see the largest disparities across all of those kind of issues or social determinants of health that we want to look at. And if we fix it for us Black folks, we're going to fix it for everybody. And then
Absolutely.
the work that I do is very strategic. It could be from grassroots to strategic work, sitting on multiple boards, helping to build 501c3 organizations. In addition to that, one of the ways in which I give back to my community is by providing good, solid information so our community can make good life choices that will improve their life expectancy and quality of life. And I do that through a long-standing podcast and radio show in Minnesota called the More We Know Community Show, Conversations Cultivating Change, where I have phenomenal leaders like Nekima and others that showcase their work, talk about how they are driving for change, overcoming challenges, and basically just inspiring our community to do the same. So my word that I would choose is a choice between brilliance and impressive, but it means the same thing. And when we think about all the challenges we face, the brilliance and the impressive and committed nature in which we overcome is simply amazing. And that's what we should lift up as an organization, not as an organization, sorry, as a community.
Thank you so much, Dr. Sylvia. I will remember those words, brilliant and impressive, to describe Black women's leadership. Thank you for sharing your experience and sharing those words with us. Next, we will hear from Alicia Dixon.
Good morning from California, everyone. It's such an honor to be here with you all. Thank you so much for this amazing invitation. As was stated, my name is Alicia Dixon. I have the honor and privilege of serving as the executive director of the Marcus Foster Education Institute. We are an education advocacy systems change organization based here in beautiful Oakland, California. I've been in that role for about the last years, and it has been a highlight of my career. My background is in public health. I'm public health trained, so everything I view, all of the work that I put my hand to, I have a prevention orientation. I want our communities to stay healthy, to be happy, to be whole, to be self sustaining. Those are the mantras that drive my work. Dr. Foster's philosophy, he founded the organization. It's the first African superintendent of schools here in Oakland and the first African American to serve a large urban school district in the entire United States. And his philosophy was about the work, right? Like, what do we need to be doing differently so that students have a better outcome? Instead of looking at students as the problem, how do we look at the system as the problem? The results that that the system produces is the problem. And so, how do we correct, rectify, reconcile those issues in a really disciplined and focused way? I think that there are so many different approaches that are out there to change systems, but they don't actually have the impact that we want to see. Money comes in, investments come in, but nothing changes. So I I am all about addressing the status quo and really taking a hard look at the fact that we become quite comfortable with some of the deplorable outcomes that our communities suffer. And so we've got to stop it. We have the ability to stop it, the brilliance to stop it. We have the answers and we have the resources. My one word about Black women leadership is it is self-catalyzing. We have this amazing ability to make something out of nothing. And I just love that about us and our creativity and heart to make a difference. We know we have the answers in us.
Thank you, Alicia. I love that word self-catalyzing. It goes perfectly with brilliant and impressive book that Dr. Bartley mentioned. And when I hear the example you gave, it just reminds me of Tupac Shakur when he talked about his mom making miracles every Thanksgiving, making $1 out of 15 cents. A lot of us have grown up with that mentality of having to make something out of nothing in light of the circumstances that we were dealt. And I think no one does it better than Black women. So thank you for sharing that, Alicia. Next, we will go to Titilayo Bediako. I was going to call you Titi. That's
I know you are.
her name, but her full name is Titilayo Bediako.
Hi, everybody. So I'm Titilayo Bediako. I'm the founder and executive director of We Win Institute. Our mission is dedicated to the academic and social success of all children. In doing this work in education, it reaches every facet of our community because the success or lack of success of our children is directly linked in terms of what's happening in the families, in terms of what's happening in our community. And I started in education as a classroom teacher in the Minneapolis public schools as I live in Minneapolis, Minnesota. And the one thing that I learned very quickly in terms of being a classroom teacher is that education in America really has very little to do in terms of our children learning and more in terms of what the majority society calls in terms of having our children behave. The problems that we see with our children in public institution has everything to do with the fact that they're not learning about themselves. They're not seeing the greatness of their people and the accomplishments that we've made. We have teachers that are working with our children that don't live in our community, that don't know our culture, that don't know how to talk to or relate to people, and particularly mothers that look like you and me. And I say particularly mothers because, it has traditionally been part of our role and still is part of our role as mothers, as leaders, as educators in terms of the education of our children. And the one thing that we have seen is that we've seen a system that works very hard in terms of particularly alienating Black women in terms of being able to support and sponsor the success of their children. In Minneapolis, we have a school system that gets paid more than $15,000 per year per child to educate them. Yet, only 14.9% of our children are reading at grade level. So the question that we have to ask ourselves is one that says, how is it that during segregation, we are having a 98% success rate and that we look across the country now and we have such a dismal success rate in terms of our children. And one thing that I can say for sure, it has everything to do with white supremacy. And that the one thing that we see is that who's in the leadership of changing this around is Black women. And I want to say that I am one of the very fortunate women in America that has been a Wayfinder Fellow, and it has helped me tremendously in terms of probably one of the greatest things in terms of being a Wayfinder Fellow for me is really helping me in terms of my own confidence, in terms of really appreciating and getting out there in terms of leadership and just a real shout out in terms of Nekima is that Nekima, like no other leader that I've seen in America, has worked so hard in terms of just pushing, promoting, and supporting Black women leadership. And, oftentimes, so many of, I mean, we've always been in the leadership in terms of Black women, but we've very seldom until recently have had people say that we're leaders, that we're strong, that we're brilliant, and that we have to get out there. And so I'm honored to be in the presence of all of you. And I just have to say that the one other thing in terms of Wayfinder and Nakima was very supportive in terms of we win, in terms of this vision that we have. And as a matter of fact, let me just say that I went to Nekima first, and the vision being creating a we win village, and this village being a Black space by which Black organizations come together and that we build in terms of our own strengths, not only in terms of what you see on the surface, but really strengthening our infrastructure so that we can work together based on principles that are universal in relationship to our community and to the world, and that it's an example of what we can do as Black people. And I want you to know that the piece that Nekima played in this is that she helped in terms of sending people my way, and when we needed support in terms of testimony, that Nekima was there no matter where she was in the world, because everybody know that Nekima was all over the place, that she was there and she supported us. And I want you to know that we did not have a lobbyist whatsoever. And this year, we were part of a bill, and we received $3.4 million towards our village. And my words are for Black women, I have to have two, and one is powerful, and the second one is essential.
Mm. Absolutely. Thank you, TT, for your powerful testimonial and sharing the breakthrough that you so deserve and that your organization deserves with the $3.4 million that was appropriated by the legislature for you to buy a building to build the We Win Village, which I'm very excited about. I know so many educators and people who care about youth and community members are also excited that we will have a safe haven that envelops our culture and shares that with our young folks. So, congratulations and thank you for all of your hard work and your heavy lifting that you do day in and day out. And thank you for the words that you shared, powerful and essential. We also heard self catalyzing from Alicia and from Dr. Sylvia Bartley. We heard, can you guys remind me again?
Hang on, two words, brilliant and impressive.
Brilliant and impressive. Yes. So we
Yes.
have brilliant, impressive, self catalyzing, powerful, and essential. Those are phenomenal words that we should be meditating on and reflecting upon as we think about the power of Black women and our contributions in society. Now, you all each shared a word, but if there was one thing that you could change about Black women's leadership, what would that be?
I'll jump in. If we're talking about the relationship, the traditional relationship that Black women-led organizations have with traditional philanthropy, I would say autonomy, like core operating support. Trust my leadership, understand that the results that are produced are because of what's inside of me, my creativity may not all fit within the confines of a set of great objectives that I have to formulate for you to perform, to get these resources to affect the kind of change that we all want to see. I think there needs to be greater authenticity and choice in terms of the resources and how they're expended. Just the whole policing of pennies, really not making a substantive investment, going to really move the needle in community. It's just another level of assault. And so I think
Mhm.
we really have to trust Black women, invest in Black women, know that Black women deserve the same level of consideration that's given to any other group. And I think something that I think is really important that's been touched on so far with the comments is it begs the questioning and the observation and consideration of how we internalize oppression, right? How we're all subject to it. And, for those of us who are doing our work and trying to make sure that we're vigilant about the messages that are out there in society about us, about Black people in general, that we're being vigilant, but recognizing when we see it in others, right? And not personalizing, knowing that that's not about us and that we have to keep pushing to stand in our belief that we deserve the investment and we deserve the resources.
Amen.
I would love to build on that, Nekima, if that's okay, because I love what Alicia just said. And my two words when it comes to I'd like to change would be I would love for there to be fairness when it comes to Black women in leadership roles, no matter which sector they're in, together with freedom. And
Mm.
so why do I say that? In 2020, there was a study done by Lean In and McKenzie, and it was called The State of Black Women in Corporate America. And it's one of the largest studies that's been conducted in this space. And it really provided data to what we already know and feel. So to Alicia's point, all those barriers that she spoke about, there's data behind it. In that study, it really demonstrated or showed with data that Black women are underrepresented in
Mm.
leadership roles for a multitude of reasons. And it comes from microaggressions to macroaggressions to Black women having feel that their race, it makes it harder for them to get a raise, to get a promotion, to get ahead, compared to like 49% of Black women feel that compared to 3% of white women and 11% of women overall. 20% of Black women leaders experience having someone say or imply that they're not qualified, compared to 12% of all women and 6% of men. 38% of Black women leaders experience being mistaken for somebody at a lower level, compared to 26% of all women. And then there's also the angry Black woman or women stereotype, right? Where we're not allowed to express our emotions, even if we are at the receipt of sexism or racism. It dehumanizes us, and they're focusing on us and our emotions, and they're using that to give us low performances and lower recommendations. Because believe it or not, there is a study out there that talks about the effects of the angry Black woman stereotype by Daphne Motro et al. And they state that when people are depicted as angry, that affects their performance evaluation, and that in turn affects their recommendation for annual raises. So it affects our bottom line at the end of the day. And so for that reason, I would love to get rid of all of that, right? And make sure that we are treated fairly and equally. It's not about any affirmative action. We heard today the Supreme Court has just done a negative ruling to affirmative action when it comes to universities. And I'm wondering how that will spin out now into diversity and inclusion goals, right? Because this is going to have a ripple effect. But it's not about affirmative action. It's about giving us Black women who are skilled and
That's right.
experienced and leaders just the fairness and the space and the freedom to do the work that we're employed to do without judgment or having to prove ourselves or just constantly having to overcome these barriers. So that is something I am very passionate about and would love to see us collectively address. The good news is there are studies from Forbes, Lean In, there's data out there, there's many catalysts, many organizations that look at situations and cultures in the workplace that is taking this up, that is presenting data and also presenting solutions for what companies can do to address those.
Thank you, Sylvia. I'm glad that you mentioned the studies that are out there because a lot of us are not familiar with the data. We know our own experiences and the experiences of other Black women around us or the women that we confide in. But to know that there are studies out there, I think only supports the arguments that we make and the advocacy that we do around amplifying and supporting Black women's leadership. And I know I can relate to the angry Black woman trope and the superwoman trope, right? Those
Mhm.
are two tropes that I constantly feel caught in between, right? As an outspoken advocate for racial justice. And I'm thinking, first of all, we have a right to be angry, right? About
Mhm.
all the things, all the things. We have a right to be angry. But the reality is that even if we're just expressing ourselves, we are labeled as angry. And you compare that with what we're seeing in terms of white rage, right? And what that looks like, what it has looked like historically, and how it's downplayed as if it's normal and it's not normal. January 6th, if people didn't know before that, showed us that it wasn't normal, and everything that we've dealt with in terms of just the backlash, particularly against equity and inclusion, against us trying to teach folks our history, and against our presence as Black people, that we are currently up against. And it's like we don't have a voice, even as we are speaking our truth and sharing our insights, which we still don't have a collective voice in terms of putting these issues on the table. I think that that's hugely problematic. I want to turn to TT to get your insights. You heard from Alicia, even talking about the fact that we're being policed over pennies, right?
Mhm.
And we're not even asking for the special treatment that I think we deserve based on what we've gone through. We're just asking for basic equal treatment, and we haven't received that. So, TT, what would you change about the current state of Black women's leadership?
Well, I'm going to come from a little different perspective than what's been said already. And I really kind of want to add to something that Sylvia said. And that's the thing that we're really short on in terms of Black women leadership is those of us that are in the corporate business areas and those of us that are part of community. Those of us that are part of community, those of us that are mothers, that we don't get enough opportunity in terms of picking the brilliance of a Sylvia Bartley, for example, and that we have a society, and it's not accidental, that keeps us apart. And it's so we have this whole question of race, but we also have this class piece. This class piece says that if I'm of a certain income, and of course no one knows exactly what our income is or what our educational experience are, that I shouldn't be able to have a relationship with someone like Sylvia. But the one thing that I know for sure is that our strength and that our power comes when we talk about this collective piece in terms of us as Black women working together in terms of this same agenda. One of the things that Dr. Barkley was talking about was this whole question of women's health. And the one thing that we can look at ourselves historically, and we are some of the most brilliant, resilient, fantastic human beings on the planet. But we hold up all this stuff that we're holding inside in terms of our own trauma. And, I'm wondering, even in terms of all the brilliant work that's happening out here, how do we bring, in terms of our own healing together, so that we can speak with one voice in terms of what our needs are? And I guess I would just add one thing that even in terms of the funding communities, and the one thing, so We Win is 27 years old. And the one thing that we have always done is that we have always made clear of who we are and what we stand for in terms of an organization. A mistake that too many Black organizations make is that we run after the dollars and we don't hold on to our mission and what our principles are. And I want you to know that it's designed that way. They play lots of economic games with us, But I'm telling you, Dr. King made a statement that to compromise on principles is to abandon them, that we can't abandon our principles. We have to stand from a place of love and work in terms of our community. And those of us that consider ourselves conscious, that we have to come together outside of these kinds of forms to do practical work that benefits Black women, which then ends up benefiting our entire communities.
Absolutely. And as you were talking, one of the folks who's watching, hope I'm saying your name right, Melissa Kalima, said we can pick greens together no matter where we work. And that and that was perfect during your time of speaking, TT, because you have actually initiated a community garden, where you're inviting people to come pick greens, come pick vegetables, teaching young people about sustenance, in our community, knowing we're dealing with food deserts and everything. But I think one of the things that the viewer was getting at is the fact that we cannot afford to let societal barriers become barriers for us as Black women and as Black people. It doesn't work for us because we're a communal people. We have kinship networks that have sustained us since the beginning of time, and especially here in the US. So we cannot play by their rules, mainstream society's rules, and expect to prosper in the way that we should. So I want to give Sylvia and Alicia an opportunity to weigh in and comment on anything you heard or anything you want to share.
Yeah, I think the point that you just made, Nekima, I think it hits the nail on the head, right? It's the translation that I think Black people, Black women have to do in terms of advocating for the needs of our community. I dare to guess that TT's Mama TT's Win We Win Center is not something that exists in the minds of many of the folks in the broader community, right? And the fact that she is, rebuilding, reweaving that important community vibrancy and connection, right? It's just love and it's beautiful. But I think the articulating that need and securing the resources to do it and to do it in a way that's going to meet the need of community, it's where there is this divide. And there are lots of reports written about this lack of understanding, right? This gap between where funders are and where communities are, and their ability to see and invest in what's most important. But I think that's exactly what's called for. So,
Yeah. Yeah, wonderful. And just to build on that comment, Alicia, I think you're talking about trust philanthropy, right? Giving the money without demanding the impacts and telling communities how to do it, but just trusting the
yes.
community who know and experience what their needs are and letting them do that. But, to another point, I've got to bring in a little bit of science in here, right? Because that's just what I love to do. But we're talking about supporting each other and the wellness of Black women. And this is a really crucial part of our success, right? Because there is a ton of data out there that really speaks to, and Nekima used the word, us being super women wearing our cape, thinking that that's a good thing because we are being resilient and we're doing everything. But it is to our demise if we're not looking after our physical and emotional health. Because there's, lots of data out there that has a correlation between low social economic status, chronic stress, and chronic inflammation. And chronic inflammation leads up to primary and secondary conditions such as chronic illnesses such as hypertension, obesity, depression, cancer, which, by the way, are the comorbidities for risk factors for COVID-19. And that's why we saw that big disproportion of Black people dying or being hospitalized by COVID-19, because as a community, we have a high prevalence of these chronic illnesses, which is a risk factor. And that is associated with chronic stress, which, as we know, is associated with, the racism, the segregation, and just the stresses of having this low economic status and constantly having to defend ourselves and overcome these challenges. There's also another study out there by Arlene Geronimus. It's a famous study where she talks about weathering. And essentially, weathering is a term that she coined when she did a study looking at a cellular level of biology. And on our chromosomes, we have these telomeres. These telomeres, they dictate or indicate a cell's life. And when it came to Black women, our cells were accelerating at a rate 7 times more than white women and other folks. And that means that we are prematurely aging. And that is all related to chronic stress. And so it's really important, whilst we think we're being super women and we're doing everything and everything to everybody, if we're not looking after our emotional and physical health, we are doing ourselves more harm than good.
Thank
Yeah,
you
and
for hearing that. Go ahead, Alicia.
no, I was just going to say, I just have to jump in on that because I think it's such an excellent example of the importance of developing our own frames of analysis, right? How we view a problem matters in how we solve a problem. If we continue to individuate these outcomes in a way that doesn't look at capitalism in the way it's currently practiced as a root of all of what Dr. Bartley just described, we miss the forest for the trees, right? We miss what's really important in the conversation. And on the issue of data, because I'm a data head too. And, when you're looking at a study, we really need to impart the knowledge for our people, especially to understand when they're hearing a report on the news and it's talking about the benefits of X or Y, to understand who's behind those studies, to understand who's funded to conduct those studies, right? Coca-Cola is good for you this week. Next week it's killing, right? So you just no slam on Coke. Just you just have to be aware. But I want to say that data, when we own it, when we hold it, when we collect it, right? We have a tremendous opportunity to make change because that data that we collect about what our community needs, how our community responds to culturally relevant interventions is the kind of evidence that we should be sharing with one another first and foremost, right? So we should be making a case to one another about our value and what we can do together. And then to the broader community, right? Why these investments are important, why things happen in the way that they do, and how we can achieve change. So the data is important, and we definitely need a set of practices that are normalized in our community about data. But we should own it, right? It should be ours.
Absolutely, because only we are having the kind of experience that we're having. And I think one of the things that came to mind when Dr. Sylvia was talking about weathering, it reminds me of the contrast that we normally say, which is black don't crack, right? And black don't crack, how do we reconcile this notion of weathering, right? We have to recognize it's not always how we look on the outside, but it's what's going on the inside based on all the stress, the trauma, the baggage, everything that we carry on a regular basis, again, that gets ignored, that gets undervalued, that gets erased. It's a part of our story and our history. And I know for me personally, I became awakened to part of it, right? I'm still learning, but I became awakened to part of it when I read stories about Harriet Tubman when I was in high school. And being able to see everything that she was up against and the fact that somehow, she resolved to move forward, to bring other people along on the journey, to free people, to defy laws that were racist and white supremacist and discriminatory, to stand up for our people. That, at least for me, that sense of understanding and consciousness helped me to adopt a different narrative for myself as a Black woman and to see our people through a different lens than how society tries to describe us. So I think that historical piece, the data, the sharing of stories, and us gathering as Black women and affirming one another Again, not just how we look on the outside, but how we look on how we are on the inside makes a world of difference in terms of being able to move things forward. I want to pitch this next question, starting with TT, but I would love for everyone to answer. We know that Black women are on the front lines, that we're demonstrating our leadership on a regular basis, but our leadership also needs support. What kind of support do we need or are we requesting from institutions, organizations, etc.? What's the missing link right now in terms of support?
I think that even in terms of for the philanthropic community to support us, that they really need to have a basic understanding of who we are and what our leadership is about, and giving us the space to do our work. And that it's not designed that way. But I think that the way that that happens is that I have to come back to the point of saying that one, we as Black women have to come together and we need to begin to speak with one voice in terms of things that we want to see for our community. So this larger society would tell you that Sylvia and I want two different things because she's a doctor and I'm not. But she has as great of an impact in terms of our community as I do. It's just different than what I'm doing. But this society will want to qualify to say which one is better or the best or what is acceptable. And that we as Black women have to decide this for ourselves. And so when we come with one voice, it has to be one in terms of our brilliance. We are brilliant as Black women, and that we know what our community needs, that we are the ones that are experts on ourselves. No one else can be experts on us but us. We know what we need. We know that if I tell you that I need $1 million and that $1 million will help in terms of the first stage of what we need to do in terms of our planning, for example, in terms of helping our children in terms of leadership, that we need to have a group of philanthropists that we can go to that understands that we are the expert and give us the support that we need in order to do the work in our community. No matter how well meaning people that don't look like us are, no one can take the leadership for Black women except for ourselves. And that we have to do it based on principles. So, our organization, for example, uses the Nguzo Saba or the seven principles of Kwanzaa, Umoja, which means unity, Kujichagulia, which means self-determination, Ujima, which means collective work and responsibility, Ujima, cooperative economics, Nia, which means purpose, Kaumba, which means creativity, and Imani, which means faith. I can't emphasize enough in terms of the importance of the unity in terms of us as Black women, because if I have to help us remember historically, we have had so many forces coming against us, working to make sure that we do not love each other and embrace each other. And actually, we have had forces that have worked very hard for us to not see ourselves as leaders and for us to talk badly of ourselves. And we as Black women and Black women that are on this call, on this platform,
Broadcast, yeah.
yes, and we're saying that we are powerful, that we are brilliant, and that so are our children. And one of the things that We Win is doing, and we're doing real consciously this summer, is in terms of our young girls, in terms of helping them see how brilliant they are and that they are leaders, and putting them in positions publicly to have those voices. And I want you to know, in terms of saying that, that part of Nekima Armstrong's leadership is that she not only does that with young girls, but that she does that with her peers and she does it with her elders like me.
Love
Thank
it.
you, TT. Just pouring back out what's been poured into me. And a
Mhm.
lot of it, honestly, Black women, right? From my family, my mom and my grandma, but also having Black women teachers and Black women community leaders in my life. When I lived in LA, I went to an organization called the Girls Club every day after school. And when we got to Girls Club, there were Black women elders there teaching us things like how to sew, how to bake, public speaking, how to play instruments, how to do dance. All of those things made a huge difference. And it wasn't until I got to USC, University of Southern California, that I realized that one of those women who had been supporting those efforts all those years was the vice provost of USC. Never told us, as when we were girls and we would see these Black women leaders show up, contribute, pat us on the back. We had no idea of the positions that they were in society. It's just like the sister said earlier, like we can pick greens together no matter where you work. That was the mentality of those Black women leaders reaching back and investing in us. And that's something that we all have to do for each other. Like it's a mandate at this point. That's why we're saying like we got us, right? We want institutions to support us. They need to. It's long overdue. However, at the end of the day, we know that we got us. And so that's, a big part of the premise of these conversations, reminding us who we are and the power that we all hold in the midst of everything that we're up against. So I want to give Dr. Sylvia and Alicia an opportunity if you want to also respond to the question about what support looks like from institutions.
Yeah, that's a great question and great discussion. And I just want to build on the fact that the networking and the power of a support network is really what drives the success of any individual, right? And when we think about our Black community and Black women, this is what we're very good at doing. However, we do get some crabs in the barrel, right? And we need to really address that head on, I think, and really figure out how we can support each other cohesively, no matter what sector you're in, what level you're at. Everybody, like you say, we can pick greens together. We're all one or one accord. And I'm really much of an advocate for supporting all Black women, irrespective of status or title or whatever that, category we use to prevent us from doing that. And there's power in that. But when it comes to institutions, I want to think about it as the in the system and out the system, right? If I start with out of the system, entrepreneurship has just really soared, particularly during a pandemic, and Black women entrepreneurship has soared significantly. One of the fastest growing entrepreneurs are Black women, yet Black women are receiving less capital and support to do their business, and they're earning less money when it comes compared to white individuals. So for institutions, banking, lending, finance, I believe that, again, it comes back to that fairness, making sure that Black women have access to all of the resources that they need to drive successful careers. Because it's not only good for that Black woman and her business, but it's also good for our community and the economy, because ultimately Black entrepreneurs hire Black people. And when you look at the unemployment rate, within our communities, of the wealth gap in our communities, that gets shorter once we have entrepreneurs hiring people that look like them. And so I think it's really important that people get access to resources in a fair and equitable way. And then within an institution like corporations or nonprofit organizations, again, it's just the fairness piece and supporting a Black woman, uh, eliminating all those stereotypes, overcoming all of those barriers, and really just acting with fairness and equity when it comes to networking, promotions, salary, having a seat at the table, allowing us to do the work that we are employed to do. I think that, and then not silencing our voice. That is so typical of silencing the spirits and the voice of powerful, black, brilliant, impressive black women because it makes other people feel uncomfortable or inadequate. And as black women, we tend to crouch or feel small in order to make other people feel better. And that is what we shouldn't do, in the famous quote of Marianne Williamson, right? We should not do that because we are here for a greater calling and a purpose, and we should really stand in our strength and do that.
Absolutely. I think the only thing I would add is what drives me is my community, my home community. I was raised in Compton at a time when the schools, and I'm not saying, I want to say the schools were functioned in a way that supported students to do their absolute best. And I think I feel like I was on the tail end of that benefit, right? Where that kind of support was happening at scale, right? Like it was palpable. You could see it walking down the hallways. You knew, the teachers, administrators, et cetera. And a lot of what fuels me is systems owe that to children, right? Like we need to figure out. We spend a lot of time on this every day, thinking about the way educational systems operate and the way we can create greater, more holistic accountability around the way they perform as it pertains to Black children. And I just feel like I owe that, right? Because I got it, right? I was a beneficiary of it. And I think all children deserve that. And so, yeah, just that's all I wanted to interject about just educational systems. And we pay a lot into them and they should work for our children.
Absolutely. And when they don't work for our children, we are the ones left to pick up the pieces within our families and within community. And again, often with a fraction of the resources and support that we deserve. So I'm hoping that the Black women who are listening to today's conversation feel encouraged, know that you're not alone, and that there are other Black women standing shoulder to shoulder with you, feeling it in a very similar way about what has happened and what needs to happen to help change the current trajectory that we're on. And we're hoping that allies who are listening decide to take action, more tangible and concrete action after this conversation and do an assessment, right? Looking at your practices, your policies, who has a seat at the table and why? What support you're claiming to offer communities of color, and how effective is that support? Who have you talked to help determine whether or not what you're doing is actually useful to the communities that you're claiming to serve? I can't imagine doing any work in this society, whether it's being a lawyer, whether it's running a nonprofit, without having Black women on my team and on my side. I can't imagine it. Just given the vast experience that we all have, the ancestral knowledge and wisdom, and the things that we go through, there's just unique insights that we bring to the table that too often get discounted. So I want to give us an opportunity to think about a question that has been raised by Denise Barreto, who is our producer for today's show, and who is a phenomenal Black woman in the Chicago area. And here's what she said. Last question we had was about funding Black women-led movements. And it's called We Got Us, which was inspired by a friend of Denise's. When you hear that, what comes to mind about the unspoken nature of the way that we support one another? And as you give your answer, I want you to respond in a way that speaks to the Black women who are watching today's broadcast. What does it mean when you hear "We got us" and the unspoken nature of how we support each other? And you can even be aspirational as well. If we're not there, how do we get there? What do we need to do, or what practices do you personally engage in that demonstrate our support, our unspoken support for one another as Black women? and anyone can take on the question.
I was going to say, I will jump in. I love it that, we got us. I think current and aspirational, right? What I love, and I could talk about my experience, is as I was growing up in my career and going through my career, at every pivotal stage in my career, there was a Black woman that had me. And that Black
Right.
woman came from all different walks of life. They took time out of their busy schedules to impart words of wisdom, to provide support, to literally go out of their way to make sure that I was okay and on the right path to success. And they were honest, they were compassionate, they were truthful, and they came with this experience and wisdom that really did help me along my path. And without them, I call them my earth angels. Without them, I seriously wouldn't be where I am today. And that can look in many different forms. It could be a family member, mother, sister, friend, partner, but people that really have your back and you trust them explicitly, that you can tell them, what your challenges are. You could be vulnerable and you know that they've got you, and what they say is for the best of your interest. And that's what I want for everybody. I want every Black woman, man, child to have that experience throughout their lives. And it doesn't mean the person that did it, when I was 20 is the same person that's doing it when I'm much older. They show up at different times, and they play a pivotal role. And I really do call them my earth angels. And that's what I want. And when I see collective Black groups together, particularly Black groups of women supporting other women, that's what I like to see, with the good intent, authenticity, the sincerity, the integrity, and just the wealth of resources and love that brings, that literally lifts you up and carries you through to the next stage and the next stage and the next stage. And that's what I would love to see when we say that, we've got us. Like, that's more.
Yeah, I love that, Sylvia, and it reminds me of that quote about someone speaking your name in a room you haven't yet entered, and being courageous in doing that, right? And as long as we do that for one another, and support one another in meaningful ways, both in terms of, telling one another when our slip is hanging, like, okay, you know, we're gonna do this. We're gonna do this together, and I got you, right? And building the relationships and trust among one another and holding one another in high regard and esteem, but also holding one another accountable. Like, we see one another in ways that other people don't see one another, and sometimes that acknowledgement of being seen may be all that we need, right? Just that nod and that look that, I hear you, and I may witness you not being seen in this space, but here, I'm going to acknowledge publicly that I see and hear you, right? And often that's just enough to turn the tide in a conversation, right? And so, because I think once we have an opportunity to be promoted in our career, and we have some semblance of power and authority and ability to move resources, it can be intoxicating for some people, and they lose their way. And, they begin to think that the resources belong to them instead of to community. And so, it's not about, castigating that sister, right? It's just about being in relationship with her enough to help her understand her role, right? And to know that that's not about us as the individual, right? As the recipient of that, but it's a reflection of all that happens in our society. And, we talked about that a little earlier. We have to acknowledge very often the toxicity of the soup that we live in, and not be so quick to judge and blame one another, but to embrace and have compassion and understand where a lot of that seemingly negative behavior is coming from.
And
But
yeah, and can I quickly interject there and say emotional health, emotional health, and emotional health. Like,
critical.
when we see a sister acting up, don't think she's crazy.
Exactly.
Understand what's behind that with
Exactly.
compassion and grace, because it could be there's a lot of emotional health challenges out there, And we need to support that in our community as well.
Absolutely. And that's something we don't talk enough about either.
Exactly right. And I think I would just add one more thing, that we share our stories with each other, that we share what we've been through, so that there's some, like, and probably most importantly, our mistakes. So other sisters don't have to make the same mistakes, and share our contacts with each other. We don't have to hold on. As a matter of fact, the thing that we really need to understand is the more that we share, the more comes back to us. So let's share our stories, share our resources, share our contacts, so that it helps in terms of building a stronger sisterhood that we so greatly need, because the foundation of our community is Black women.
Absolutely. And we are the backbone of this society. And we're
Yes,
not going to let them forget that.
yes.
Very,
Excellent.
and we're here to stay. And we're grateful for the opportunity to be here and to serve our communities. But we do need
Excellent.
support. We deserve support.
Okay.
Want to thank our incredible panelists today for taking the time to be a part of this important conversation. Dr. Sylvia Bartley, Alicia Dixon, and Titilayo Bediako. You all exemplify the power, the strength, the resilience, the brilliance, the impressiveness, and the self-catalyzing nature. I tried to get it all in. To all our words of Black women. And I'm just personally grateful that you took the time to share your wisdom and your insights with us today. One of the folks watching said they challenge us to do this conversation again, and for the women watching to also bring a friend. And I agree with that. I would love to see us have more of these conversations and create more safe spaces for Black women to thrive and to know your value. You're seen, you deserve a seat at the table, and you deserve all the support that you can handle. So thank you all again for taking the time. Thank you to our producer, Denise Barreto,
Thank you,
for helping
Denise.
to assemble us together.
Thank you very much.